Story number 1. I was about 10 when it happened, and to this day, I still don't know what kind of luck or fate saved me that afternoon. My family lived on the outskirts of a small town, near a huge forest that stretched for miles. It wasn't unusual for kids in the neighborhood to venture in there, even though our parents always warned us about getting lost. Of course, as a kid, you think you're invincible, and nothing bad ever really happens, right? It was a warm summer day, and my friends and I had set out on what we thought would be a quick adventure. Just a typical, explore the woods kind of thing. We'd done it a million times. Only this time, we decided to go deeper than we ever had before. The further we walked, the thicker the trees got, and the more the sunlight seemed to disappear. I remember feeling that first twinge of unease, but I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination. After about an hour, we came across this massive old tree with carvings all over the bark. Names, dates, weird symbols. It was creepy but kind of cool, so we hung out around it for a bit, daring each other to add our own marks. That's when things started to go wrong. One of my friends, Tyler, wandered off to the other side of the tree. We could still hear him joking around, but his voice was getting fainter. I figured he'd come back soon, but minutes went by, and there was no sign of him. "Ty, quit messing around," I shouted, trying to sound tough, even though I felt my heart racing. Nothing. Silence. The other guys started to get nervous too, but no one wanted to admit it. So, we split up, each of us going in a different direction to find him. I took the path straight ahead, hoping I'd hear him laugh or see him peeking from behind a tree any second now. I walked for what felt like hours, the woods getting eerily quiet around me. No birds, no rustling leaves, just that creepy kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I was about to turn back when I noticed something strange. There was this small, run-down cabin in the middle of the woods, something I'd never seen before, not in all the years I'd explored these woods. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades, the windows broken, the roof sagging. Against my better judgment, I crept closer, hoping maybe Tyler had found it first and was hiding inside, waiting to jump out and scare us. As I approached, I heard the faintest sound, like crying. My heart sank. It wasn't Tyler's voice. It wasn't anyone I knew. I froze, listening harder, trying to make sense of it. I should have run right then and there. I should have turned around and never looked back, but something pulled me forward. Curiosity maybe. Stupidity, definitely. I stepped onto the creaky wooden porch and peered through the cracked door. Inside, it was dark and cold, much colder than it should have been for a summer day. The crying stopped. That's when I heard the footsteps behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly fell off the porch. Standing just a few feet away was a man, dirty, disheveled, his clothes torn like he'd been living out there for years. His eyes locked onto mine, and I swear to God, I've never seen a human look so hollow. He didn't say a word, just kept staring at me like he was deciding something. My legs were jelly, and every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. Then he took a step forward. I don't know what finally snapped me out of it, but I turned and bolted. I ran harder and faster than I ever had in my life, crashing through the trees, branches whipping my face. I didn't stop, didn't look back, not until I was out of the woods and back in my neighborhood, gasping for breath. When I finally told my parents what happened, they didn't believe me. They thought I'd made the whole thing up to explain why Tyler and I had gotten separated. But I knew what I saw. The next day, the police came to our door. Tyler hadn't come home. Search parties were sent into the woods, and they scoured every inch, but they never found him. Not a trace, not even a footprint. To this day, I can't walk by those woods without feeling that same dread creeping up my spine. And every time I close my eyes, I see that man's face, those cold, empty eyes watching me, deciding whether I was next. Story number 2. I never thought I'd see the day where I'd be forced to fight for my life, but the universe has a twisted way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. I was a pretty regular guy, married with a couple of kids, working a decent 9-to-5 job that wasn't going to win me any awards, but kept food on the table. The only thing extraordinary about me was how painfully ordinary I felt, until one evening turned me into a man I barely recognized. It was a Thursday night. My wife Jenna had gone out with some friends, and I was home with the kids, Emily and Zach, ages 7 and 4. I had just put them to bed when the sound of glass shattering echoed from downstairs. It was one of those sounds that doesn't register as dangerous at first. You hear it, and for a split second your brain goes, oh, maybe I knocked over a glass. Except, I was upstairs. There was no way I'd broken anything. My stomach sank as the realization hit me. Someone had broken into the house. I froze. my heart pounding so loud it felt like the whole neighborhood could hear it. I wasn't some action hero. I didn't have any training for this. Hell, the most I'd ever fought was a mosquito. But now, there was someone in my house, and I had 2 kids to protect. I quietly locked their bedroom door and whispered to Emily, "Stay quiet, sweetheart. Don't come out, no matter what." I tiptoed out into the hallway, grabbing the only thing I could find, a metal bat I'd stupidly bought thinking I'd take up softball again someday. My legs felt like jelly as I made my way down the stairs, the bat trembling in my grip. There were muffled sounds coming from the kitchen, and I could see the outline of a figure moving in the dark. I tried to think of something, anything to say. Something tough, something that would make him realize I wasn't someone to mess with. But all that came out was a shaky, "Get out of my house." The figure froze, turning toward me slowly. My blood turned cold as I saw him fully for the first time. A tall, broad man, wearing a ski mask and holding what looked like a crowbar. He didn't flinch, didn't move an inch. He just stared at me, like he was sizing me up, deciding if I was a threat or just an obstacle. The adrenaline hit me like a freight train. My mind was racing, thinking about Jenna, about Emily and Zach upstairs, about how this man could destroy everything I loved in a heartbeat. I gripped the bat tighter, feeling the sweat in my palms, and took a step forward. My voice was steadier this time. I said, "Get out." That's when he lunged at me. I swung the bat blindly, feeling the impact as it connected with something. His arm, maybe his shoulder, I don't know. He grunted but didn't stop. He slammed into me, and suddenly, we were on the floor. I couldn't breathe, his weight crushing me as I struggled beneath him. He raised the crowbar, and in that moment, I knew this wasn't just a robbery. He wasn't here for money. He was here to hurt me, maybe worse. Everything slowed down. I saw his arm coming down, the glint of the crowbar in the dim light. I don't know how I did it, but I managed to twist just enough to avoid the blow. The crowbar smashed into the floor next to my head, and I could feel the cold metal scrape my skin as I wrestled to push him off me. Somehow, by pure instinct or adrenaline, I got the upper hand. I kicked him hard in the stomach, and he staggered back just enough for me to scramble to my feet. I swung the bat again, harder this time, catching him square in the chest. He doubled over, gasping for air, and I didn't wait for him to recover. I just kept swinging, over and over, until he was on the ground, motionless. I stood there panting, the bat still raised in the air, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. My mind was racing with 100 thoughts. Is he dead? What the hell just happened? What if he gets back up? But my body wouldn't move. I was frozen, staring at the man I had just beaten to a pulp in my own kitchen. It wasn't until I heard a small voice from the top of the stairs that I snapped out of it. "Daddy?" I turned and saw Emily, her wide eyes peeking around the corner, clutching her stuffed bear. I dropped the bat immediately, rushing to her and scooping her up in my arms. "It's okay, sweetie. It's okay. Daddy's here. You're safe." The next few hours were a blur. The police came, my wife rushed home, and I found myself telling the story over and over again, to the officers, to Jenna, to the paramedics who checked me out. They arrested the guy, said he was some repeat offender they'd been after for months. Lucky me, right? I was the house he'd picked that night. In the days that followed, I tried to go back to normal. I told myself I was fine, that everything was okay, that I had done what any father would have done. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw him lunging at me again, the crowbar coming down. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing phantom sounds of glass breaking downstairs. I don't know if I'll ever shake the fear that's lodged itself in my chest. The rational part of me knows it's over, that he's behind bars. But the other part, the part that wakes up in the dead of night, listening for footsteps that aren't there, well, that part's not so sure. I keep the bat under my bed now, just in case. Story number 3. It's funny how quickly life can flip on you. One moment, everything is fine, completely normal, and the next, well, you're fighting for your life, literally. I never thought I'd experience that feeling until last year. What started as an innocent camping trip with my 2 best friends turned into one of the most terrifying nights of my life, one that I still have nightmares about. We'd been planning the trip for weeks. It was supposed to be a guy's weekend, just us, the mountains, and no cell service. We'd go hiking during the day, sit around the fire at night, talk about nothing and everything. It's what we did every year, and every year it was the same peaceful, laid-back routine. This time, though, something felt off from the start. I'm not the superstitious type, but I swear there was a strange vibe the moment we reached the campsite. It was way more remote than we'd expected. The trees were thick, casting shadows even in the middle of the afternoon. The whole area had this stillness. No wind, no sounds of birds, no insects buzzing, just dead silence. I remember joking about it, saying we were probably trespassing on haunted land, but no one laughed. That first night, we sat around the campfire, passing around beers and talking about random things. We heard rustling in the trees a few times, but we shrugged it off. Probably just deer or squirrels. At least that's what I told myself. It wasn't until the fire started dying down that things got weird. Around midnight, my buddy Jack pointed out that there was light coming from the other side of the trees. It wasn't a flashlight or anything like that. It was this faint, bluish glow, kind of like a distant campfire, but colder. We figured maybe some other hikers had set up camp nearby, but we hadn't seen anyone else all day. Curiosity got the better of us, so we decided to check it out. We grabbed our flashlights and followed the glow into the woods. The further we walked, the dimmer our flashlights seemed to get, which didn't make sense. I mean, they were brand new. That's when I noticed the temperature had dropped, like, significantly. I was shivering, even though it was July. Something in my gut was telling me to turn back, but we kept going. The glow was getting brighter now, and it seemed to be moving. After about 20 minutes of walking, we reached a clearing. In the middle of it, there was this thing. At first I thought it was a campfire, but the flames weren't orange or red. They were blue, and they didn't flicker or crackle like fire should. They just floated there, twisting and swirling like smoke. Around the fire were these stones arranged in a circle, but they weren't like any stones I'd ever seen. They were smooth, almost polished, and they had strange markings carved into them, symbols I didn't recognize. We stood there in stunned silence, staring at it. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt this overwhelming urge to leave, like we'd walked into something we weren't supposed to see. Jack took a step forward, and that's when we heard it. A voice, not loud, not a shout, just a whisper, barely audible, but it echoed all around us. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone. It was cold, like ice slipping down your spine. Jack froze. He didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there, staring into the flames, his face completely blank. "Jack, we need to go," I whispered, my voice barely holding steady. He didn't respond, he just kept staring. Then the whispering got louder, and it was coming from all around us, like the trees themselves were speaking. I grabbed his arm, yanked him back, and finally snapped him out of whatever trance he was in. He blinked a few times, like he was waking up from a dream, and without a word, we all turned and bolted back to the campsite. We didn't talk about it. We didn't need to. We packed up as quickly as we could, and by sunrise, we were driving back to the city. None of us have mentioned it since. It's like this unspoken agreement. We all know what happened, but we refuse to acknowledge it. A few weeks later, out of sheer curiosity, I tried looking up anything I could find about that area. Local legends, ghost stories, anything. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. There was a story, buried in an old newspaper archive, about a group of settlers that had disappeared in those woods over a century ago. According to the article, their camp was found abandoned, with strange symbols carved into the trees around them. The article mentioned that some of the locals believed the settlers had stumbled upon something ancient, something that didn't want to be disturbed. There were whispers about cursed land, about spirits that lured people in with lights and voices, only to take them. That was the last time I ever went camping. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts, but I know what I saw and what I heard. Something was out there, and it didn't want us to leave, but we did, and I'm grateful every day that we did. Story number 4. It's funny how quiet everything gets when your life is on the line. You'd think there'd be panic, screaming, maybe even your own thoughts racing in your head, but no. For me, it was dead silent. Not even the sound of my own heartbeat. Just the cold realization that I might not make it out of this. It was about 2 years ago, and I was on my way back from a late shift, the kind where you stay in the office until your eyes burn from staring at the screen for too long. I was tired, my head fuzzy, but I kept going because the highway was mostly empty, and home was only about 15 minutes away. I figured I'd grab some fast food on the way, shower, and pass out. Routine stuff, right? Except that night, the universe had other plans. It was raining. Not a heavy downpour, but that annoying drizzle that makes the roads just slick enough to be dangerous. I wasn't speeding or anything, just keeping up with the few cars around me. I remember glancing in my rearview mirror, checking out the car behind me. It was one of those tricked-out muscle cars, headlights so bright they practically blinded you. I could see the driver getting antsy, weaving in and out of the lane like he was late for the apocalypse. I let him pass, shaking my head at his reckless driving, and went back to focusing on the road ahead. It wasn't long before I saw him again though. This time, a few cars up, causing chaos. He was swerving, tailgating, cutting people off. It was like watching a crash happen in slow motion, except you don't know when or how, just that it's coming. And then, it did. I was just about to take the exit from my street when the car in front of me slammed on its brakes, hard. I barely had time to react, hitting my own brakes as my tires skidded across the wet pavement. I felt the back end of my car fishtail, and that's when I saw it. The muscle car, out of control, spinning directly into my lane. I've never felt time stretch like that. The world slowed down to the point where I could see every raindrop, every shimmer of the headlights reflecting off the wet road. I had two choices: plow into the car in front of me or swerve into the other lane and pray there wasn't anyone else coming. I swerved. For a split second, I thought I was going to make it. My car glided into the next lane like it was on ice skates, dodging the spinning car by inches. But then, out of nowhere, I felt it. The impact, hard, from the passenger side, like a freight train hitting a brick wall. The force of it lifted my car off the ground, and I spun out of control, heading straight for the guardrail. The only thing that went through my mind in those final moments before the crash was, this is it. I thought about my wife. I thought about my parents. I thought about how I never told my brother I was proud of him, even though I should have. It was weird, like my life didn't flash before my eyes, but these random things, unfinished conversations, moments I'd taken for granted, all the things I hadn't done yet. The sound of metal crunching was deafening as my car slammed into the guardrail. The impact threw me forward so hard that the seatbelt cut into my chest, knocking the air out of me. For a moment, I didn't know if I was alive or dead. Everything was spinning, upside down, inside out, like my brain couldn't catch up with what had just happened. When the car finally stopped, I was tilted sideways. The passenger side crumpled like an accordion against the rail. The engine was hissing, smoke pouring out from somewhere, and I smelled something burning. Rubber, maybe. My hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't even move. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to make sense of the fact that I was still breathing. That's when I heard the other driver, the guy in the muscle car. He was shouting, screaming at someone, probably on his phone, yelling that it wasn't his fault, that someone had cut him off, that he was fine while the rest of us, well, we were lucky to be alive. The cops and paramedics arrived within minutes, but it felt like hours. They had to pry the door open to get me out. I remember one of the paramedics asking me if I could move my legs, if I could feel my hands, and it was like I hadn't even noticed my own body until that moment. Everything hurt, but I was alive, somehow. Turns out the guy in the muscle car had been drinking. He'd blown through a stoplight earlier, almost hit someone there too. And me? I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was lucky, they said. A couple of cracked ribs, a concussion, and some stitches on my arm where the window shattered, but no lasting damage. At least, not physically. But the mental scars, those don't go away as easily. Every time I get behind the wheel now, I feel that moment creeping back up on me. The spinning car, the impact, the realization that I might not make it home. It's like a shadow that follows me, lurking in the background, reminding me how fragile everything really is. I didn't sleep for weeks after that. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced that I could hear the screech of tires, the crash all over again. And every time I pass that stretch of road, my stomach drops, like I'm right back there, about to swerve, about to crash. I still drive, I still live my life. But something shifted that night. That silence. The moment where time stretched and everything felt like it was hanging by a thread. That's something you don't forget. It stays with you, even when you think you've moved on. I guess I'm one of the lucky ones, but sometimes, being lucky doesn't feel that lucky at all.